Alright, hello again everyone. Hope you had a lovely festive period and are enjoying the new decade so far. Today I come to you bearing some exciting news. So, as I believe I've mentioned in the last couple of episodes in this series, I've been thinking about tweaking my Patreon for a while now. I wanted to change around the reward system to give you guys more stuff. So after fiddling around with it for a while, I decided to implement two main changes. Number one, there is a new reward tier for $15 a month, where I will translate something into one of my conlangs for you, or if you're more into the alien biospheres videos, I will design a species and name it after you and feature it in one of the videos, and that will become more pertinent as the alien biospheres series goes on. But the big thing that I wanted to announce here is that now, after receiving a considerable amount of help from some of my patrons, I now have a Discord server. I will include a link in the description of this video and probably every video going forward. Feel free to come along and join in if you're even remotely interested in conlanging or speculative biology or any other sort of world-building type topic. I confess I still don't entirely understand how Discord is supposed to work, but my mods do, and that's the important thing. So feel free to join up, and we'll see how things go moving forward. And speaking of the patrons, another big shout out to all the patrons, including, but not limited to, all of these people. Come on, there we go. All of these people that you see on the screen in front of you. And a happy 2020 to each and every one of you. Also, just to let you know, I am in the process of recovering from a minor cold type thing, so if I sound weird during this episode, that's why. Anyway, let's get on with the task at hand. So, now that we have satisfied the goals that I set out for myself, in this video we're finally going to tackle the phonology and get a robust phonetic inventory and list of sound changes nailed down for both the proto-language and the modern language. So these are the sound changes that we worked out in the last few videos for producing the vowel harmony system and the non-concatenative morphology. So I guess the first step is just to have a look at the sound changes and see what sounds are necessary in order for them to make sense. So right off the bat, we have said that there are these back consonants that trigger high vowels to lower. So what immediately comes to mind with that are pharyngeals and maybe uvulas as well. Not saying I'll include all of those, but those are just some to think about. Then we've got these weak consonants that we need in order to trigger the vowel hiatus, which will eventually give us front vowels. Glottal consonants immediately come to mind, as well as maybe some vilas as well. And then for these nondescript palatal consonants, Y, and when I say Y, I mean Y. And maybe like a sh or sh. And then down here, we need to have an S to make that happen. So we need these back consonants to be lost in order for the low vowels to become phonemic. And when I say lost, the pharyngeals could just be lost completely. Or they could just weaken to H, and then H is one of the weak consonants that gets lost in the next sound change. Meanwhile, with the uvulas, they could just merge with the vilas to become K and G respectively. Or if we wanted to, we could keep them around, because as long as one of these is lost, as long as we have an E or an O occurring independently of either of these sounds, then it will become phonemic. Now this... Okay, with this next one, there's a couple of things to note. Number one, a sound change that I do very often is I get rid of intervocalic H, and then I have some stronger fricative, like a Labialfricative, weaken to replace H. And we could do that here. We could say that the glottals drop to nothing, and the velas become H, maybe. The other thing is that we've said here it's specifically intervocalically that they're lost, because we need to bring the different vowels in contact with each other. So we could save them, we could still keep them around in the language, if either the phonotactics allowed for them to cluster, or if they didn't, we could implement a round of vowel loss. So that kind of begs the question of what the syllable structure is in the proto-language. I tend to prefer having a proto-language with a relatively simple syllable structure, because it makes it easier to control how your phonotactics end up later on. So if, for now, we assume that it's purely open syllables in the proto-language, that would mean that weak consonants being lost intervocalically would be essentially synonymous with weak consonants being lost in general. It's quite useful having H cluster sometimes, because there's a sound change I use all the time, which is if H is bordering a consonant, then it's deleted, and the preceding sound, whether it's a consonant or vowel, is lengthened. So that gives geminates and long vowels, which is quite useful. Or equally, it can be used if it clusters with consonants. If it follows a consonant, it can lead to the consonant before it becoming aspirated, which would give us a whole new consonant series. And also, if the glottal stop clusters, it can result in ejectives. Just something to keep in mind. Might rough in. How about vowel loss between voiceless obstruents? That would mean that the H would cluster together with the other voiceless obstruents, and then when it's lost, and then later on, H can be lost completely to lengthen the preceding vowel or geminate the preceding consonant, and that's when Labialfricatives become H. And if we do it like that, then geminates will only happen because H clusters with these voiceless obstruents. If we wanted to do it differently, we could make the proto-language CVR, where R stands for resonant, or sonorant, so we could have nasal and liquid codas, and then if there happens to be an H following that, then when H is lost, that geminates the resonant. Oh, and I should also mention, I want the proto-language to have long and short versions of each of its 3 vowels, just because that lets me control the stress patterns a little bit better. There's still the question of what I want to do with the uvulas. Do I want to keep them around? I'm gonna note that and come back to it later on. Oh, and in fact, yeah, we can throw in the glottal stop as well. So the glottal stop will also cause gemination/lengthening. I don't think I'm going to include ejectives in this language. I don't know, I'm just not feeling it. This is the thing, is that as I'm making this phonology, I have in my head a very rough sort of idea of what I want the phonesthetics of this language to be like that's basically impossible to convey verbally. So I'm kind of just feeling my way through this, and it's very difficult to describe my actual process other than, oh, it kind of feels right. So it's looking like it's going to be a pretty geminate-heavy language, which I kind of like because I very often find that I don't use geminates as much as I feel I should. And if it turns out there are too many geminates, then we can always implement degemination later on. Okay, so then, as for these palatal consonants, so the original idea for that was based on the sh alternation in Mandarin and its effect on the following vowel. And in fact, in Shanghainese, sh and sh have merged with s. So we could do that here as well, or something similar to it. I imagine y is probably going to stick around. I don't expect that going anywhere in particular, unless we implement fortition and have it turn into a j or something, but that'll be later on. But we could have these ones. Again, we're not necessarily going to include both of them, but if either one of them is present, could have it merge with s. I'm thinking I might not implement palatalization in this language, as in, like, the majority of the time I have consonants that come before a front vowel undergo palatalization, so that's usually how I generate affricates like ch and j, is if there's a d or a g or a t or a k that comes before an I or an E, then they palatalize. But I think I'm not going to do that here. I think I'm going to go more like Latin and have no sh, no ch, no j, no j. I don't know. Again, I'm just sort of feeling my way through this. And I've put here vowel loss between voiceless segments. But we had vowel loss between voiceless obstruents, which is basically the same thing. Do I want to do that again? No, I think I'm going to get rid of that. And then we have our shenaniganery with the vowels. Okay, so with all of that, that means that our proto-language, at least some of these sounds, I might keep both the voiceless and voiced pharyngeal fricative, just because that increases the amount of vowel hiatus that we get when they're lost. I should have said here, actually. There we go. And then we come back to what we're going to do about k and l. Now, k I might want to hang on to, but l is a very rare sound. So in phonetics, the further back in the throat a consonant is pronounced, the harder it is to voice consistently. So, k, the voiceless variant, it's not super common, but it's not rare necessarily. I mean, you've got it in like Arabic and Inuktitut and Georgian and Mayan, and yeah, it crops up here and there. Whereas the voiced variant, l, is much, much rarer to find phonemically, which is one of the reasons why Mongolian is so weird, because they only have the voiced version. But most of the time, if a language does have the voiced version, it will be lost in some way. Like, a lot of the time it will turn into a r, like a fricative or a trill. And I did that in Adun. There was a whole sequence of nonsensicality that happened with the voiced uvula stop. It led to a whole bunch of really crazy consonant alternations. It was great fun, but I don't want to do that again. I do actually really, really like the voiced uvula stop, but the problem is I used it in Ilothwy, and that's one of Ilothwy's kind of like signature sounds, so I'd feel bad about using it here again. So I might just axe that. So get rid of the voiced one. And then, yeah, why not? We'll hang on to the Q. We can always make it merge later on if we want to. Then y is totally fine, nothing controversial about that. Unless y comes later on, when the vowel hiatus happens. We could do the standard thing of having, if an e or an u is next to another vowel, they turn into glides. So then we say that if e and u go to y and w next to another vowel. There we go. That will mean the proto-language won't have y, that'll come along later. It's always weird to me that sh is not a sibilant fricative, but the only difference between these two is that one is a sibilant and the other isn't. So which one we include is almost irrelevant. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it's the non-sibilant, for basically no reason. Now, interestingly enough, also in Adun, I had another sound change where if an H preceded a Y, the H was palatalized to become a Sh, and then later Sh and Sh merged to Sh. I could do something similar here, again. So I could have the H before a Y or an E turn into a Sh, but then it would feel weird for that not to also cause other kinds of palatalization, like t going to ch and things like that, which I don't want to get into, so nah, I'll leave it like that. That's fine. Actually, hold on. I forgot. Could also do the same thing with yeah. And then we can have yeah merge with yeah. So that would mean the proto-lang does have these palatal consonants. Maybe in the stage before the proto-language there was some sort of round of palatalization that resulted in these weird palatal consonants that then gets lost later on. I kind of like that idea. Okay, so aside from those consonants, what else is the proto-lang liable to have? Well, so it seems pretty uncontroversial to say that it's going to have some nasals, like m and n, and maybe l as well. The velar nasal is a weird one. I really like the velar nasal in word initial positions, but unfortunately for me, the velar nasal is comparatively rare in word initial positions. I don't know why, but for some reason it's not super rare, but if a language does have a velar nasal, it only ever appears in initial positions about half the time or so. I had the word initial velar nasal in Adun and in Elorthwy, so... And I'm also not too big of a fan of the word final velar nasal. I'll think about that. I'll leave it in there for now, but I'll come back to that. And actually, for the sake of sound symmetry, there might also be a palatal nasal. So we'll throw that in there. And then the palatal nasal can be yet another trigger for the U to E mutation. And then later on, we can have it merge with normal N. And while I'm at it, I might make a sound change, or at least an allophonic rule, maybe in the proto-language, because we've said that resonance can come as codas. I might just go ahead and say that y and ny just turn into normal l and n in coda position. And then it will probably have a uvular nasal allophonically when occurring before a uvular stop. But I don't think I'm going to make the uvular nasal phonemic. Then on to stops. Now we've already got a distinction between a voiceless and voiced pharyngeal. So that means there is going to be some voicing distinction present in the obstruents. So that means we can have voiced and voiceless stops. This is already looking pretty Arabic-like, with those pharyngeals and the uvular stop. But I'm tempted to go full Arabic and have B, but no P. So going back to the principle I was talking about earlier, how the further back in the throat the sound is pronounced, the harder it is to voice, the opposite is true as well. The further forward a sound is pronounced, the more likely it is to be voiced. So B is the most common voiced stop. So there are languages like Arabic, and I believe Arapaho as well, that have a B but no P. And in the case of Arapaho, I think it's the only voiced stop. In fact, let me check that. Yep, see, I was right. So Arapaho has got a B but no P, and it has no other voiced obstruents. And in fact, it also doesn't have an M, because I believe the M became the B. Arapaho in general has a really fascinatingly weird phonology. I mean, look at the vowels. Look at that. I, U, E, O. No R. It's so weird. Anyway, so I might do that, Because I'm not a huge fan of the labial sounds in general, but especially I don't like word final P, which, if we follow our sound changes as described so far, when S and the P metathesis takes place, and then the epenthetic vowel is inserted, we'll end up with word final P, and I don't like that. So we can avoid that by removing P altogether. So I think I'm going to go with that. I'm going to have B but no P. Then as for alveolars, I'll include both T and D. And if I was going to go all the way Arabic, then I would exclude G as well. But I'm not going to do that. Or am I? Ugh. Yeah, I'll include both K and G. And then we've got our lone uvular stop, H. And for fricatives, we've got S. And are we going to have Z as well? If we throw in a Z, then we'll have to say down here, because we just said S turns to R there. So it's actually more likely to happen is S turns to Z, and then Z turns to R. Okay, alright. I don't think I'm going to include any labial fricatives off the bat, but I might want to introduce them later on. I'll think about that. Oh, I forgot, we need to include H and R as well. Oh, whoops, and also, I forgot, we need to include the glottal stop in there as well. And then we have H as another fricative. And then for liquids, Y and W come later. For now, it's going to be a L along with Y, and probably a rhotic of some description. Okay, let me turn that into a proper chart and see how it looks. So looking at this, the thing that immediately leaps out to me, there's a missing spot here. So we might have some palatal stops. I might put those in there. Palatal stops always kind of confused me, because to me they sound virtually identical to their corresponding affricates. Or in the case of the voiceless one, it just sounds like kya, like a KY cluster. So we might include them, and then find a way to get rid of them later on, along with the other palatal consonants. But the thing is, with the other palatal consonants, it's easy to just have them merge with the alveolars, like nya becomes n, sh becomes sh, l becomes l. That's all pretty straightforward, but I'm not sure if k and g would ever merge with t and d. In fact, let me look that up quickly. Aha! See that? It is possible. Thank you, Middle Vietnamese. So we can say that the palatal series merges with the alveolar series. But I think I'm going to say that the y, I still want the y to go to y. So I'm going to have that happen first, earlier on. And the only other real gap is the uvular fricative, which I don't think that's a problem, because I think it's pretty unlikely for a language to distinguish h, and ch. I think that's a little bit too much. So the only other thing to think of is, do I want to add any affricates? I've already said I don't want a palatal affricate. I tend to overuse the TS affricate, so I'm not going to do that. So no affricates then. So the only thing left is for me to think, do I want this velar nasal? And also, why did I copy the velar nasal for the palatal nasal? That's not right. There we go. I'm going to leave it in there for now, and if I want to get rid of it later, I can always implement another merger or something. So that's what our proto-phonetic inventory looks like. Nothing too out of the ordinary. So then, next thing to figure out is what happens to the phonology once we implement all our sound changes, what does the modern phonology look like? So firstly, the pharyngeals are lost completely, and so is H and the glottal stop. Then the Labialfricatives move in and replace H. Then E and U become glides next to other vowels, so that gives us Y and W. And I always write W under the vela column, even though it's a labiovelar, but I'm not going to be fussed to make a whole new column just for that. Then Y merges with Y, and all the palatals merge with the alveolars, so they're all gone. And then finally up here, Z is lost and becomes R. So that gives us this as our modern consonant inventory. I've always been biased towards smaller consonant inventories just because it's easier to manage and it gives the language a more consistent phonesthetic. The only other thing that I might want to add, I think, is a labial fricative. There's two main ways we could do that. Number one, we could have the labial stop become a fricative in certain environments, particularly intervocalically. Or we could have the labiovelar liquid, W, become V in certain environments. Or we could do both. I forgot about this. I had this leftover sound change. I might just get rid of that. B goes to V intervocalically. And that will give us an allophonic labial fricative. We could have the V be phonemic if we implemented this change earlier and say that there's vowel loss between fricatives and some other sound. Like up here we have vowel loss between obstruents and sonorants, but that would mean that V would occur next to nasals, which I'm not a huge fan of. I think I'll leave that like that for now and just come back to it later. So if we leave that as our provisional modern consonant inventory, now to think about phonotactics. So the original proto-language only allowed resonance in coda position. And actually, I just realized, so here with this allophonic rule in the proto-language where Y becomes L in coda position, that's going to lead to some fun alternations down the line, because remember in other environments, after this point, Y becomes Y. So now we're going to have this weird thing in the language where sometimes a Y, if it gets included in a consonant cluster, is going to turn into a L, which is going to look really weird. I love it. So we have a round of vowel loss here between voiceless obstruents. So that means that at this point, the language becomes CVC, where the accepted codas include any voiceless obstruent, and then later on, when the glottals are lost, that leads to gemination. But then this sound change reintroduces H in consonant clusters. So by this point, voiced obstruents do not cluster. So this change with a metathesis is likely due to the fact that voiceless stops are comparatively difficult to discern in coda position. So that makes sense. So then voiced stops can only cluster at this point with sonorants, and that comes later on. So there will be no voiced stops plus fricatives, or other stops. And that also means no geminate voiced stops either. I'm fine with that. That makes some degree of sense to me. And then word final vowel loss. So that begs the question, with word final vowel loss, what sounds do we want to allow in coda position? Yeah, I think I'm okay with any sound coming in coda position. Word final k always reminds me of Inuktitut, and also Okalawak. In Okalawak, the the first-person singular paradigm has a lot of word final k. The only other sound that I might want to exclude from coda position is h, which again, coda h makes me think of Finnish and Navajo. I don't know. I think maybe coda h's could be kind of cool in clusters, but I think maybe word finally I might get rid of it. Bearing all of that in mind, the acceptable clusters that the modern language has include any obstruent plus any resonant, or any resonant plus any obstruent, the order doesn't matter, fricative plus voiceless stop clusters. So the voiceless stops cannot come in coda position, and voiced stops can't cluster with other consonants, except for resonance. But then we have to remember, wherever it is, here, we cannot have word initial or word final clusters. So our phonology remains CVC. You know, the more I think about it, the more I'm not sure I like having the velar nasal involved. There's just too many other things going on. Yeah, I'm gonna get rid of that, just to streamline things a little bit. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So that's our consonant inventory, and we've already worked out the vowel inventory up here. Okay, so after thinking about it a little bit more, I'm going to make a couple of small changes. I don't know why did I put the pharyngeal column there? I should have... No, uvula goes there. Much better. So I think it's reasonably likely that the velar fricatives might also be pronounced as uvulas, sort of in free variation between the two. And I am increasingly cognizant of the fact that this proto-phonology, it does look remarkably like Arabic, what with it's got a B but no P, it's got voiced and voiceless pharyngeals, it's got a uvula stop, and it's got 3 vowels, and it's got a glottal stop. It's basically Arabic if you threw in a palatal series. I don't like that so much. First of all, I think I actually might change the palatal fricatives back to sibilants, like that, and including the voiced one, that just makes it more symmetrical. Okay, what if instead of going full Arabic, what if got rid of the H and got rid of the voiced pharyngeal? So we need the pharyngeal to pull high vowels down. Okay. How about this? We do have H, then vowel loss between voiceless obstruents comes first. Then the glottals are lost intervocalically as well, and then both the voiceless pharyngeal and the voiceless velar fricatives replace H. In fact, we might throw the voiced velar fricative in there to get lost intervocalically, to give us more vowel hiatus. I still kind of want to throw the voiced pharyngeal in, though, just to give us more low vowels. You know what? Screw it. I'm going to throw it in there. I'm going to use the voiced pharyngeal. And now we're back to where we started. Great. I'll also have the voiced pharyngeal get lost intervocalically as well. But the fact remains that this is just so Arabic-y. One thing that might help, actually, we could include the voiced uvula stop. And then we say at some point early on, we could say that the voiced uvula stop goes to the voiced velar fricative, and then that gets lost later, further increasing vowel hiatus. I quite like that. There's a sort of symmetry to that. Actually, it just occurred to me, if we're going to ditch these completely, then it wouldn't be losing them intervocalically, it would just be losing them in general. Do I want to get rid of these? I think so. Yeah, I'll just say they're lost completely. In fact, I'll just combine that into one sound change. Something to be careful about when removing consonant distinctions is you need to make sure that doing so won't be damaging to any grammatical paradigms that you have in place. Like, for example, if the past and future forms of verbs only differ in the fact that one's got an H and one's got a pharyngeal, and then H's and pharyngeals are both lost, then now you've lost a big chunk of the grammatical information being conveyed. So in a situation like that, we would expect that the distinction is maintained. Just something to keep in mind. So that makes it a little bit less like Arabic. Kind of. I don't know, I'll come back to that. And by the way, I want to turn this one into an actual sound change rather than an allophonic rule. If we say that vowel loss between obstruents and sonorants happens earlier on, which I don't think will affect anything else, and then we put that in there, now we get that alternation that I was talking about earlier between y and l. It also occurs to me that we made y and w up here, but then they're immediately being converted into diphthongs and then into monophthongs with these changes. So they're not actually going to survive into the modern language. Well, except for y, because y turns into y later on. But w, does w survive? I don't think it does. So that means the modern language will have no w, which honestly I'm kind of okay with. It's kind of like Turkish, y but no w. Another thing that's just occurred to me is that while we have these palatal stops kicking around, we might as well do something fun with them. Looking through the Index Diachronica, it looks like it's reasonably common for palatal stops to become y, especially between vowels. What if just before this point, we say, if the palatal stops go to y intervocalically, and then in all other positions they go to T and D respectively. So then you get another cool alternation where sometimes T and D will also turn into a Y. So that'll be a pretty persistent mutation across the whole language. And another sound change earlier that I forgot, nasal assimilation. Nasal assimilation, it's not mandatory, but it's very, very likely to happen. There are some languages that for some reason just seem to be immune to it. Like Manchu, you've got words like and German, where you've got like MD clusters and things. But more than likely, some form of nasal assimilation is going to take place. But I think for this, I'm going to say nasal assimilation before stops, and only before stops. And that actually makes me think, vowel loss between obstruents and sonorants means we're going to get obstruent nasal clusters, like TN and DN, things like that. And I'm not a big fan of that, honestly. That's not a problem for fricatives, because the only fricatives we have in the modern language are S and H, and I'm fine with both of those before a nasal. But these stops, I don't like those before nasals, so I might just say that if a stop comes before a nasal, then the stop is lost and the nasal geminates. That can happen, right? Yeah, I'm sure that can happen. Before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and say that this R is a trill. I really like trilled R's. I have a little bit of difficulty pronouncing them consistently, but I do really like the sound of them. You know, the more I think about it, the more I think I don't like having the G there as well. I might get rid of that too. But the problem with that is if we get rid of the G, then does that mean we have to get rid of the G in the proto-language and therefore make it even more like Arabic? No, because we've got the voiced uvula, and it would be very unusual for a language to have a phonemic voiced uvula stop and not a phonemic voiced vela stop. So I'm going to keep that around, but that means I'm going to have to get rid of the G later on. Down here I said that I wanted B to go to V intervocalically. What if that also affected? So we could have all voiced stops become fricatives intervocalically, and usually when a D is involved in that, it sometimes goes to an eth, like a the, or sometimes D can go to an R between vowels. I did that in nakachti. Or I could just exclude D. So if we say that D goes to the between vowels, then we say that the voiced velar fricative is lost intervocalically. That gets rid of G between vowels. Another thing that we can do is say the velar stops become palatal stops before front vowels. That's pretty intuitive. And then later the palatal stops just turn into y, and then velar stops before front vowels is reintroduced once front vowel harmony kicks in. So that's a way to get rid of some of the G's. So apparently in Arabic, the G palatalized to a gya, I guess in all environments, and then gya became j. Interesting. Does that mean then that I can justify having G go to a velar fricative intervocalically and then to a voiced palatal stop everywhere else? So pretty much immediately following the proto-language, the velar and uvula stops lose their voicing distinction and turn it into a stop fricative distinction. I think that's at least kind of justifiable. Let me know in the comments below if you have any input or thoughts about this. Because if someone tells me, no, don't do that, that's nonsense, then I'll probably double back on that. But for now, I'm going to keep it like that. And that means by this point, the G is already lost. So we can ignore that. But I'm still going to have the K become a palatal stop before front vowels, so we can still get that cool alternation later on. Okay, so that means we have finally purged G from existence. I kind of feel bad for it. It's like I'm out to just destroy it. So by this point, this is no longer necessary. So get rid of that. I might keep that in there just as a... I'll keep it allophonic. It'll be a bit like Spanish. Also, we can get rid of that too. Okay, now that that's at last done, let me just have another quick look over everything. I'm just thinking with this bit here, with the umlaut, would the uvula stop affect that in any way? Because very often, uvulas are involved in uvula coloring, where they pull vowels down and back. But if that happened, that would kind of destroy, not necessarily destroy, but it would hinder the progression of the vowel harmony. It would throw a wrench into the whole thing. We could do something like what Manchu does, where Manchu has this cool thing where the K is pronounced as a uvula before back vowels. Because in fact, in the proto-language, there was a distinction between velar and uvula stops. They got leveled later on. And actually, in the writing system, there are two different letters for k versus k. But now it's purely an allophonic distinction. So we could say, after vowel harmony has already become established, then uvulas cause front vowels to become back vowels. I think that's pretty good. I realize I need to formalize the stress system as well. So I'm just going to say, in the proto-language, we use the standard stress the penult if it's long or closed, and stress the antepenult otherwise. And then down here for word final vowel loss, what that actually means, loss of word final short vowels, and shortening of word final long vowels. So that will introduce word final stress for syllables that contain long vowels. So that would make stress kind of difficult to predict in the modern language. I'm not going to actually define a stress rule now. We'll just see what sorts of patterns emerge once we actually start evolving words. And now, just about the only thing that we have left to concern ourselves with is the romanization system. And luckily, in the modern language, all the sounds can be pretty much represented with their IPA equivalents, except for y, which I'm going to romanize with a y. And then, for the vowel inventory, What to do about the schwa? I think I'm going to represent long vowels with doubled vowels. Usually I like to avoid diacritics, just for simplicity. But in this case, if we don't use diacritics and represent, like, y and with some, like, vowel digraph, then when they get long, it'll be a quadrigraph, which I don't think anyone wants that. So I think I might actually leave the schwa just as an IPA schwa for now. If anyone has any better suggestions, leave a comment below. So that's good for the modern language, but the difficulty comes with the proto-language. So the palatals can just be represented with their alveolar equivalents followed by a Y, which is pretty intuitive, I think. The Labialfricatives are KH and GH. The voiced uvula will be GQ. Now the pharyngeals are a little bit tougher. In Tabukama, I had the voiceless pharyngeal represented with a QH. But for the voiced one, I mean, again, it almost doesn't matter because it's just the proto-language. If we say that the glottal stop is an apostrophe... Oh, actually, hold on. If we have the voiceless velar fricative as KH, that might be a bit confusing when the vowel loss between voiceless obstruents happens, because then you'll have a KH cluster, and we need to make sure that that's distinguished from a ch. So I might just go ahead and use X for that. We don't have to worry about that for the voiced fricative, because voiced obstruents don't cluster, so GH is still fine for that. As much as I don't like using unnecessary diacritics, I can't see very many other options than using the H and G with an underdot. I mean, it's unpleasant, but it'll have to do, I guess. Unless, again, someone in the comments can give me a better idea. Okay, I think I'm going to keep it like that for now. I will almost certainly come back and tweak this as we go through the rest of the conlanging process, but for now, I quite like this as a general outline. So, I'm going to call it there for now. In the next episode, we'll actually start laying down some groundwork for the proto-language. So tune back in for that next time. So, thank you very much for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one.